And then Jay, I'm gonna make you the host so that if you need to do anything, it won't distract at all from what you're doing.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. And thank you for coming on a Friday night. I hope everybody's comfortable. They ate something. You got your drinks next to you. And for the next 2 hours, I hope I'm going to be entertaining you at the same time, educating you guys. So the Marine Safety Support for Prevention Program is everybody's job. So please, let's sit back and relax and watch the program. Auxiliary support for Coast Guard prevention programs is really an open program that started around 2003. And it has really expanded to the point where it is today, where we're more involved with the Coast Guard and Marine safety. And district staff officers that are involved in with the sector coordinators and the director of the auxiliary, everything that we're doing now falls under the Code of Federal Regulations we call CFRs 46. And what we go from there is that it gives us our power and our authority of what we can and can't do. So basically what we have right now is I just capsulated it. CFR 46 restricts the auxiliary members from law enforcement activities and hazmat involvement and from entering confined spaces. We'll just leave it at that. You can read more into that as you guys read into your reading in your guides, but that's the overall capsulation of where we get our authority from, and that's 46 CFR. And by the way, 46 CFR is quite large. One of the activities that we have is called the Maritime Observation Missions, or better known as MOM patrols. And basically what it is it's observing, recording, and reporting back to the operational commanders of your sector, or it could be the station of what you guys are seeing on the waterfront. It is a regular authorized patrol. It could be a regular patrol with the crew members, and you're there as an observer or as a member of the crew. But that's what MOM's patrols are. And you go to areas and waterways and land-based structures, and you basically check them out. And they may want to look for areas that may be vulnerable to attack. There may be something that needs to be repaired. It may need something in the water that needs to be fixed. It could be an obstruction of some sort. But that's what the MOM patrols basically are. You observe and you report. Container inspections. We don't have much in this area here, and that's the Midwest with containers. The East Coast and the West Coast and the Southern Coast have a lot more involvement with container inspections, because they have a lot more container traffic than we do up here. But with the container inspection, again, it's based on the unit that you're supporting. And if they have the need to have somebody there, you'd be able to work out the areas. You're identifying the markings on the containers. You're looking for certain things. You're looking for damage. You may help in inspecting a container that got damaged and taking pictures, verifies measurements. But we have some restrictions, and we're not authorized to either open or enter containers. That's done by the active side. So here we have an auxiliary inspecting a vessel container, and they may have found something wrong with it, and they're marking an X on it, meaning that it cannot be used later on. Here's an obvious one. Somehow got damaged, and again, It's the job of the inspectors to sit there and look at it, make an observation, assess the damage, and report back. Auxiliaries may be trained to be small vessel inspections, UPVs, lifeboat, life raft, personal flotation devices. So we can do some of these on our own. Some of these we're done with other inspectors. Picture here is a life raft that falls under SOLAS, which falls under a different category that you wouldn't normally find in the Midwest. This would be mostly for an ocean-going vessel. It's got a canopy and it's got life-saving equipment on board the vessel. The other thing you might end up doing is inspecting, this particular is a T-boat. And during certain times when they do a COD or a COI, you may have to inspect every one of the life jackets on board. Literally, you count and inspect every one of them. Examinations of commercial towing, UTV, and uninspected vessels called UPVs, better known as six-packs. Well, six-packs are pretty good. Here in the Midwest, we use them for fishing. It's also very popular on the coast where guys will charter and go out for a few hours on vessels just to go fishing. So this would qualify as a UPV or a six-pack operation, no more than 6 passengers. It does not include the captain. Tugboats, this is one that we use on the river here. It's a smaller type of tugboat that's just basically used for barges. Again, it depends on the local unit that you're working with. If they want you to work with them, they'll get you the qualification, and also if the need is there. America's Waterway Watch. Well, it started after 9/11, and everybody that was around at then knows what happened on 9/11. So basically what we've done is we've heightened our security, and Waterway Watch is just observations of what goes on our waterways, around our bridges, around structures, certain facilities. There's a hotline, which is up there, which is 877-24-WATCH, and you make your phone calls there. And what are you basically looking for on this? This is something what you're looking for. You're looking for unusual operations of a vessel, a small boat or a boat and vessel on land. And normally it's doing something that you don't normally see. It's there, it sits there, nothing's happening with it, it's suspicious. So you sit there and you work on that. Suspicious conditions, again, you don't do anything, you're basically reporting. You also can sit there and look for physical breaches of security, holes in the fence, cut barbed wire, something, a breach where something went, a vehicle or something ran into a fence. These are things that you would report. A person that looks like it's engaged in surveillance, taking pictures, writing down vessel trips, writing down operations of a bridge operation, people taking photos, government vessels, government facilities, power plants, tanker ports of facilities. If you see somebody with a camera like this with a lens on it and you're not at a sports facility, I think this would be something suspicious. Support for the regional exam center. Now, basically, they took this away from us. We used to help at the regional exam centers. We used to do paperwork. We used to do testing. That was been removed. Why it's a part of historical reference and why it's on the listing, I don't know, but it's here. But as an FYI for you, merchant marine credentials, that all the captains and all the people and crew members that are required to have one as of March 1st, 2024, the Marine Merchant Credentials was changed. It's been replaced by this passport to a new type that looks similar to this. It's a fold. I'm sorry, there we go. That's the passport. That's the old style now. And this one now is the new style. Dock walkers. Members are trained to qualify as a dock walker. You're basically passing around and working with commercial fishermen. You can issue decals clarifying that they are in compliance with the federal regulations for the fishing vessel that they have. Commercial fishing vessels are not the same as a UPV. Commercial fishing vessels are strictly guys that go out, and that's how they make their living. They're working on fishing boats. They're running out nets. They're running out traps. They could be running lines, but they really don't take on passengers. That's what's classified as a commercial fishing vessel. We support that. We have some members in the auxiliary that are commercial fishing vessel examiners, and basically they're only around the areas where they have commercial fishing. Members can visit the docks. They can provide marinas for information on federal regulations affecting commercial fishing. You can look more into that as if you have it in your area. The training and qualification standards for the auxiliary basically mirrors the Coast Guard itself on the active side. And members on the national staff are tasked with developing and updating qualification standards. Every time the Coast Guard comes out with a new standard or they make a change in a PQS qualification, depending on what it is, it's passed down to the auxiliary side to see if it falls within our guidelines and with our parameters. And Coast Guard auxiliaries are supposed to encourage us to sit there and work closely with the active side and the reserve side. We try very hard to sit there and work side by side with them. Training programs come from Katzman, which is in Yorktown, which is the training center. One of the things that we don't do is we don't do law enforcement and we don't do any military activities. If we see something wrong, we have to report it to one of the active duty sides. We cannot sit there and issue any stop orders or stop sail or captain of the port orders. That is not what we have to do. We're basically there to work with the active duty side and support them. You can be trained as a facility inspector with the Coast Guard Reserve units. You work with conducting port facilities for safety and security compliances. You work with the Maritime Transportation Security Act, and you then basically can get your qualifications. This particular is they're working in a fuel farm, and you notice that one of the people's wearing an EPA shirt. Sometimes you team up with members of the EPA and you work together. One of the things about the environment is that with the Coast Guard and the EPA, where they draw their line is on jurisdiction. If it starts on water and goes to shore, it's the Coast Guard's responsibility. If it starts on land and goes into the water, It's the EPA's responsibility. It's an easy line to remember. You may be trained to inspect commercial and domestic foreign flag vessels. That's called port state control. Port state control have a lot more restrictions, inspections, codes, that you wouldn't normally find in our domestic vessels here. So if you look at it, a lot of vessels that came in, like this particular one that came into Chicago, falls under the International Maritime Organization. They also have the International Ship and Port Security Code. They are required to have certain things on board their vessel. They're required to do certain things in certain training, and they're supposed to have maybe weekly, maybe monthly drills. A lot of the requirements that they also have when they come into the United States fall under Volume 2 of the Marine Safety Manual. Domestic vessels are inspected and covered under the Maritime Transportation Act, and they also fall under Volume 2 of the Marine Safety Manual. So in some cases, you have two separate codes that they have to follow, and sometimes they just mirror each other, but they work in conjunction. Again, if the facility doesn't need you on a port state control, you really can't get one. You can assist in investigations. You would probably work out of an MSU unit or an MSO unit. You probably, if you have a CGIS unit, you could probably work with a CGIS unit. You're basically an assistant. You basically are there to help the regular investigators who they'll have law enforcement activities and law enforcement powers. So if they want you on that and you have what qualifications, you may be an asset for them. Prime example is one that we just had in Baltimore with the bridge collapse. Auxiliaries could be involved taking pictures, assessing the damages to the containers, assessing damage to the vessel itself, working in conjunction with the full-time staff. Or not everything is glamorous or is newsworthy, but you could be sitting there with a fishing boat that's in violation, and you could be involved with an inspection on the smaller scale, anything from he didn't have the proper lights, didn't have the proper safety equipment on board the vessel. His ship was in ship shape and didn't meet EPA standards. So there's the big of it and the small of it. And that's strictly on investigations. The performance qualification, or better known as the PQS, to support the programs. One, remember that these are marine safety qualifications. And the marine safety qualifications are open to the auxiliaries based on the needs of the individual sector. Or in this cases, it could be a unit. If the sector or the unit doesn't need anything from you, you cannot get that PQS unless you move somewhere else. Important note on here, there are two PQSs. They have letters designated by the district DIROCs. I'll get into that in a second. So one of them is called the Auxiliary Administrative Management Specialist, or CMAM. You take this particular one is only is by DIROCs. I've taken it, I took it back, I want to say almost 20 years ago. So I know it's changed a little bit, but it's learning how to use the computer systems, learning how to work with the individual units, understanding the parameters of the breakdown and hierarchy on the active duty side. The other one is the Auxiliary Prevention Outreach Specialist. This program was changed a little bit. It used to be called MEAS, and it is now called Prevention Outreach Specialist. This is where you can sit and work with groups of schools, family, communities, teaching about the Environmental Protection Program and at different parts of the environment. The following are P2Ss that are issued by the captain of the port or his designee. Again, these qualifications are all based on the needs of the Coast Guard. So, uninspected passenger vessel examiner, the uninspected tow vessel, commercial fishing examiner, and marine casualty inspector. You notice that the first part of this is that you don't have anything there. You are the uninspected. You are the lead on it. You have the authority to lead on these particular items, except the last one, which says marine casualty investigator. The following are basically assistants. You could be a barge inspector. You could be a hull inspector. You could be a waterway management representative. You help out, on this case, you help write out permits. You work with anything that involving rivers or waterfront where people send in requests for permit to sit there and build something or move something or change something. You get with them on the involvement on that. Fireworks permits are very popular with the waterway management. Companies that sit there and fire fireworks out have to sit there and put their request in 90 days prior to the events so that they can get put in the books and be manageable. Safety issues have to come in and play. It's very interesting for the waterway management representative to work with the active duty side when they do this area. Assistant container inspector, assistant pollution responder, assistant life raft inspector, and auxiliary facility inspectors. Again, you go out with the active duty side. You're going to be able to work with them. And again, it's an important issue. It does help them out because it's another set of eyes that goes out in an inspection. Maritime law enforcement inspector, suspension and revocation inspector. I haven't seen that particular one in the Chicagoland area. It may be on the coasts, but I haven't seen one here. T-boat inspector, T-boat and K-boat, there are what they fall into the subdivision of 46. And what a T-boat means is that it's anywhere from one passenger up to 150 passengers. So those would be small excursion boats, tour boats, lecture boats, water taxis. Those would fall under the qualification as a T-boat, up to 150 people. K-boat is from 150 to about, I think it's 500. I don't remember on this particular one, but K-boats are basically larger ships. They're your dinner cruise ships that would be able to serve food and stuff. Again, they're basically limited to up to 600 passengers, not counting the crew. Last one is a machine inspector. I haven't seen many of those in this area here, and I'm not sure how many people in the Coast Guard auxiliary could qualify on this particular one. The last one is the assistant contingency planner. This now falls under the emergency management. Contingency planner is the one that helps plan out events. It plans out give me a second, I got a brain freeze. pollution control, practices. They would set up the plan, they would run everything out, they would write out all the reports on how everything would be. And they would run, these inspections. They would also run, these exercises, and that would fall under management. Any questions? I don't,
Yes, I have a question.
okay,
You said that there were two PQSs,
yes.
and the last one I didn't get written down. So it was like the second one.
Can you go back a couple slides, Jane?
Sure, well, that's the Mies one, the one that, the two that you were talking about, the first ones on the first page?
Yes. the
Okay,
new-
one is called the Administrative Management Specialist. And the other one is called Auxiliary Prevention Outreach Specialist. That deals with the pollution. It used to be called Marine Environmental something specialist, and it was changed a few years ago.
Okay, what is the AUX? Is it AUXME?
Yeah, MEES.
I think it's Marine Environmental Education Specialist.
That's
is
it.
what is what it was called. And they're still
Chris.
using that designation, even though it's now the Prevention Outreach Specialist.
Right, but they weren't going to change the acronym on it.
Right.
Excellent. Any other questions? That was a good question.
What was the example of a T-boat again?
A T-boat is an excursion boat with anywhere on any up to 150 paying passengers. It can only its maximum allowed is 150 passengers.
Thanks.
So, are you familiar with Chicago?
No, I lived in New York.
Okay. Well, look at it this way. The best example I could give is your ferries. Imagine your ferries going back and forth without the cars, and they're only allowed to carry 150 passengers to and from the islands or wherever they go.
Like Staten Island Ferry? Okay,
Right.
okay, thank you.
Okay.
One question. Other questions?
Just perhaps a clarification. I know that in the listing, it says commercial fishing vessel. It's actually commercial fishing vessel examiner. It's not safety or assistant. There's not in that designation. And that is, as far as I know, it's the only actual Coast Guard qualification. In other words, an auxiliarist who earns that qualification has exactly the same qualification and responsibilities as a regular Coast Guard or Coast Guard reservist who has that designation. And if you look at how these specialties are designated in Aux data or in the directory, all of them have Aux MEIS or Aux MSAM and all of those kinds of things, but CFVE does not have an Aux in front of it. And one of the steps of usually getting the commercial fishing vessel examiner qualification is to spend a week at Yorktown at the training center going through that training for that qualification. We have been doing some local training of commercial fishing vessel examiners here in Sector Lake Michigan as well.
Right. I thought we only have one member that I know of that holds that qual in our district.
Yep, that's me, Jay.
That's you. Okay.
Good. So real
At least I
quick,
remembered something.
Oh, no,
We're
you're
not
right
gonna-
on.
we're not going to take a break here because chapter 4 is so long, but I am going to ask you to grab your books and flip over to page 94. And on page 94, the question is number 13. Auxiliaries are trained to assist in all of the following except A, examination of commercial towing vessels, B, life raft inspections, C, factory visits, or D, container inspections. Which is the correct answer? Does everybody have the question right in front of them? You can just yell it out if you know the answer.
What's the question again? I was looking.
Page 94, number 13.
13, thank you.
It would be C.
Factory visits?
Correct, factory visits. Very good. All right, team. Great job. Any other questions? Nicely done, Jay. Wonderful slides. Team, if you don't mind, we're just going to plow forward and take a break on the top of the hour because chapter 4 is really long. And so when we get to on the hour mark, we'll take a quick break, a quick breather. Any other questions before we go into chapter 4? I didn't introduce Jay, but let me tell you, he's done more environmental activities in the many years he's been in the auxiliary than almost any other member I know. So we're very delighted to have him with us today. So without further ado, Jay, chapter 4.
Okay. All right. Chapter 4. Look at the slides, everybody. The Marine program is, as far as I'm concerned, is everybody's job. It's just not one person or a group of people. It's everybody's job. It's extremely monumental, overwhelming, and I apologize to a lot of you. This particular chapter is kind of involved and deep, and I try to break it down, and I try to go into a little detail with some of them to prevent to help you out instead of you doing all the research yourself. The Environmental Protection Program basically says this. It says that the Coast Guard extends its pollution and threats in the coastal waterways and in the coastal zones. Zones include the U.S. waters subject to the tides. Well, that goes on the coasts. The great U.S. waters of the Great Lakes, that's us. Specific ports and harbors and inland rivers. It goes up and down the Mississippi. The contingent zone and water on the high seas all the way out for 200 miles. Get an idea of what, get an idea of what that looks like. There's a map that just says to us, that's about about the 200-mile limit. So that covers a lot of water and a lot of area that the Coast Guard is concerned about and threats with us. There are 5 elements involved when we talk about assessing with water pollution. Assessing the discharge and release to ensure a proper response. Question: is this a discharge? Is this a discharge? And are these pollution discharges? They could be. The one on the left is the ballast being of a ship discharging its ballast. Doesn't necessarily have to be pollution as oil or a hazardous substance. It could be an environmental substance. It could be an invasion of aquatic nuisance species. What we have here in the Great Lakes, which is part of the quagga and zebra mussel. It came from a ballast from a foreign ship. The ship picture on the right, it's a bilge pump pumping out bilge water. Could it be pollution? The answer, yes. Yes, it could be no. It could have oil in it, mixed in with it from the bilge. It could have soapy water that was accidentally left in there, and he's pumping it out. Again, is that a pollution discharge? Yes or no? The only way you can tell is by actually testing it. Preventing spills wherever possible. Big ships, they have ideas and they have containing units. This particular thing is called the sludge and bilge holding tank. Big ships and their sludge on the units, they basically have to have some way to hold it safely and securely. So they have these tanks on big tankers and stuff. Well, what about the small guy? Well, this is a small engine, a small things. What can he do to sit there and prevent spills? Oil absorbent pads and rags. Preventing spills wherever possible. We ensure that our parties are cleaning up the discharge of oils and release of hazardous substance. We ensure the responsible parties clean up. How do we do that? 1, regulations, standards, and international agreements. Do they work? Big ship, looks like he wouldn't have any problem whatsoever. Houston judge slaps this shipping company with $1.5 million fine for trying to conceal an oily discharge. When they get caught, it's a heavy fine. There are 5 elements that were involved. We're still continuing. Number 4, the effects of the spill that do occur, and we learn from our last spills. Number 1, the Quarry Canyon spill, year 1967, off the west coast of the UK. It went aground. 2, the Exxon Valdez, drunken captain, ran aground. 3, the Gulf Wars. They spilled oil and burned off oil platforms. 4, prestigious oil spill. 2002, structural defects of the tanker off the coast of Spain. 5, 2009, Montero oil spill, west coast of West Australia, oil platform. 6, and everybody should know this one, Deepwater Horizon oil spill, Gulf of Mexico. Since we started this environmental program worldwide, and more people are on board and all the creations, there has been a 90% reduction in global oil spills from the year 1970 to last year, 2 years ago, from 2022. What makes it work? The reduction in potential spills for operations. The Deepwater Horizon, the platform exploded. And what did it cause? The devastation from that itself involved many countries to come in and help because how big it was. It took in all of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. Those coastlines were inundated with oil spill. Just washing up. It ruined the shrimp industry around New Orleans for a few years. It's finally come back. These elements are considered in all cases of pollution or a threat. Deep ports or outer continental shelf activities. We'll go into this a little bit more. The deep ports are typically used for a variety of maritime. Here's your container ships. Does anybody have an idea of the draft on a container ship?
About 35 to 45 feet.
Some of them are. Some of the super tankers go over 50 feet on a draft.
In Tampa
So-
Bay, we run about 40, 35 to 40.
Okay, the super ones now that are coming out go 50 feet or more. Okay, the environment of the outer continental shelf. Has anybody ever heard of it? Okay. Under the United Nations, and the Convention of Law of Sea called UNCLOS, the continental shelf is part of the seabed which covers coastal states exercise sovereign rights. This goes around the world. All countries that border, that have shoreline, have basically a continental shelf. And it basically what it says is that country owns that property. It's their right. They have the right to tell you how it's going to be exercised, the sovereign rights on it, including the natural resources, oil, gas deposits, other minerals, other biological resources in the seabed. The legal shelf, I'm sorry, the legal continental shelf extends out over 200 nautical miles from its coast. And it can go out further if the shoreline changes. Okay, these elements are considered in all cases of pollution. Damage or threats to the natural resources and management jurisdiction in the U.S. Threats to U.S. coastline or related interests. Threats that cause major harm and consequences. The pictures show stuff from the Deepwater Horizon. A coated pelican on the East Grand Terry Islands in 2010. And then, of course, the one on the right is a cleanup worker standing on the beach in Louisiana with oil just dripping all over the coastline. So you have an idea of how the magnitude of this oil spill was and the damage it had done on the beaches. A little bit of history on this. In 1967, the grounding of the Torrey Canyon led the United States to present an EPA effort founded on the environmental statutes, which we'll go into a little later, intended to minimize pollution by authorizing various federal agencies to promulgate standards and regulations. In other words, this oil spill that you're looking at on the picture here devastated Europe and France. Ship ran aground. It basically just split apart and it spilled millions of crude oil into the ocean, into the English Channel. Presently, there are 7 standards and regulations. One is the Marine Protection Research and Sanction Act, which addresses ocean dumping and establishes marine sanctuaries. The Act to Prevent Pollution from Ships in 1980, which implemented MARPOL, which we'll go into in a few minutes. The Ports and Waterway Safety Act of 1972. It addresses the control of vessels entering the U.S. and construction of tank vessels for safety and pollution abatements. One of the things that was changed was on one of these acts was the actual construction of super tankers and tankers, where they then had to go to a double hull to prevent damage that comes from they run aground. Ships that started construction after this period of time had to be double hulled. Tankers that went in periodically for repairs and dry dock, which went through their periodical inspections, were then converted to double hull construction. So the safety acts are starting to work. The environmental controls are starting to work. The Federal Waterway Pollution Act. Remember this one, as amended in 1972, and I'll go back to this one in a second. Intervention on the High Sea Act. This falls under the 33 U.S. Code, 1471. If anybody wants to read it, bless you. Continuing on, the Environmental Response Compensation Liability, called CERLA. And then we have the Oil Prevention Act of 1990, which was framed by the 30 CFR, Part 154, which says, and I just paraphrase most of it, modifies tanker construction and standards, reorganizes the administration of Oil Pollution Compensation Fund, and led to the establishment of the National Funds Center in metropolitan Washington, D.C. Part 254 says, oil spill response requirements for facilities located seaward of the coastline. This is the OPEC Oil Pollution Act. And basically it says if you're the owner or the operator of this, you must submit a oil response plan and into the Bureau of Safety and Environmental and Enforcement Department of the Interior. And then it must demonstrate that you can quickly and efficiently respond whenever a discharge from your facility. So in other words, they got to train the people on board their units, on their companies, their platforms, their ships, or whatever it is. If they have a oil spill and they commit an oil spill, they are the first responders. They have to be able to demonstrate that they can quickly sit there and contain this spill while calling in for extra help. But they have to demonstrate that they have the ability to do this. The National Response Center. It's a round-the-clock agency in which people call in to notify about pollutions. The NRA is not a response center or an agency. What it does is it serves as an emergency call center. They initiate the fields that are initiated to them. They'll sit there and they'll report the pollution to the right agency. It could be a railroad incident. It could be Environmental Protection Agency, Federal Management, Nuclear Regulatory, Department of Energy, Department of Defense, Department of Interior. They're a call center, and they will sit there and forward the information. So it's an important thing, and it runs 24/7. International conventions are designed to solve problems, and a lot of countries after the Corey Canyon got together and they start forming ways to sit there to work together to help mitigate oil spills or pollution on the high seas. And what it does, it says it confirms the right of coastal states to take measures on the high seas as necessary to prevent, mitigate, and eliminate dangers to the coastline. Understand when they say coastal state, it also can be a country. It could be France, it could be England, it could be Spain, Portugal. Any country that has coastline that goes onto the waterways that has commercial transportation and shipping, they're considered the right of the coastal state. In '69, the convention involved oil pollutions in view of the increasing quantities of substance many chemicals carried by the ships, some which would release would cause serious hazards to the environment. We already know this. So they had a conference in '69 in Brussels, Belgium, and the conference recognized the needs to extend the convention to cover other substances other than oil. In 1973, the London Conference on Marine Pollution, adopted protocols, and it related to interventions on the high seas in case of marine pollution or substance other than oil. And the protocol entered into force in 1983, and it's been amended to subsequently update the list of substances attached to it. So it's an ongoing program. The purpose of the convention was to control sources of marine pollution and prevent pollution of the high seas and dumping of materials into the waterways. We've heard of what we call black water and gray water. We talk about it, we change it. The so-called approach applies also for waste. What could be considered disposable in the sea? What could be, that would be a hazard to the environment? For blacklisted items that would fall under the blast list, it doesn't matter what it is, it cannot be dumped into the waterways. And dumping of gray list requires a special permit. One of the advantages that we have here in the Great Lakes is there's no dumping of any source of any materials allowed into the lakes. So now we're sitting there and we're getting a little bit more control on our environment. I use this because the United States and other countries at one time used to dump radioactive material into the ocean. They would sit and encase 55-gallon drums with radioactive material. They would then turn around and encase it into concrete. And then what they would do is they would take it out on a barge and they would dump it out way out in the ocean and sink it to the bottom of the ocean. Our other problem is this. This is plastics. Just plastic coming in and it just floats on top. There is an island of plastic floating in the Pacific Ocean. They say is the size of Rhode Island. MARPOL, the International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships of the International Maritime Organization, called MARPOL. It convened in 1973 at IMO, which is the International Marine Organization, and it set up protocols. And in 1978, they adopted a response to increase what was going on between what I talked about earlier, was tanker accidents between 76 and 77. There were a lot more oil spills than what we listed here earlier. I just listed some of the big ones, but there were a lot of other oil tanker accidents spilling oil all over the world. So the convention has now come into play, and now they're sitting there trying to sit there and enforce regulations on this. Even though it started in '73, the force didn't work until 1978, and MARPOL took protocols and absorbed it into the parent convention. So instead of changing the convention adoptions or sitting there and changing any of the protocols, they turned around and started writing a thing called annex. And annex was attached to it like we would attach amendments to the Constitution. So now we have regulations for the prevention of pollution by oil. And it came into force in '83. So basically it covers pollution by oil from operational measures as well as accidental discharges. The amendments to 1 made it mandatory for new tankers to have double hulls and phase in and schedule existing hulls to be double fitted. So as I said earlier, we're tightening up the restrictions on ships, and we're trying to make them safer, and we're trying to sit there and do as much as we can to prevent future oil spills. This is step 1. Annex 2, regulations for the control of pollution with obnoxious liquid substances in bulk. It took effect in 83. And I'm sorry, the provision was written in 83, and it took till 87 to go into effect. And it basically details the discharge of criteria of measures of control of pollution of obnoxious liquids in carrying bulk carriers. Annex 4 prevents pollution of harmful substance carried in package form. In other words, it sat there and says general requirements for packaging, marking, and labeling, documentations, and storage. Now we're going into the packaging of what's going on and being carried. Annex 5, we can't dump sewage from ships. It came into effect in 03. Ships now have to have holding tanks for all kinds of sewage. Annex 5 deals with pollution. Of garbage. We can't dump the garbage anymore overseas. It has to deal with specific garbage and what you can dump. So we talked about plastics. Is there other things that we can dump? Yes, we can dump edible foods, the same foods that we eat. We can dump into the oceans in some areas so that the fish can eat on them. So we can dump in lettuce, tomatoes, banana peels, other foods that we eat that they can eat that won't pollute and will basically biodegradable. Annex 5. Now we got Annex 6. Pollution of air pollution. Now they want to set standards on the sulfur dioxide coming out of the chimneys of the ships, the exhaust systems. So now we're sitting there and they're going to sit there and go, we want the ships that go in docks. We don't want that obnoxious smell. We want SO2 and NOx particular matters. We want them reduced. So now the smokestacks are going in there. So I just threw out to you guys 6 annexes, and to make it more simplified, I think this slide will help you out a little bit. It came from a guy from the Ethiopian Maritime Training Institute, and it basically says everything that I just said in a very simple form. We've all seen these stickers and placards. Some of them are what we use here in the United States. Some of them are on international boats. So they're put out all over the place. So the Annex 5 says you can't dump discharge into the sea. It's prohibitive. We got the oily discharge. So we put these placards up. Other countries put these placards up. These are from the United States, and one is international. What about the Coast Guard? Now, the Coast Guard has the same regulations that we have, and they're not exempt from anything. They got to comply with the same state and federal and local standard procedures and requirements. So when we clean up they're there as individual citizens, they're there. We comply with our laws that we're trying to enforce. The National Pollution Fund Center, where does it get its authority from?
Did you want to take a break here, Jay, before we get into money?
If everybody wants to take a 5-minute break, I'll be glad to, and I'll leave it right here.
Absolutely. 24 slides left. And here, when we come back from our break, we're going to talk about money. So while we have this break, if everyone would please come back at 5 minutes past the hour if you need to take a quick break. During this period, Jay and I are going to stay here in case anybody has any questions.
What makes you think I don't want to take a break?
Well, yes, I have a question because
Yeah.
we've been hearing about all these regulations and you said, do they work? Well, the oil seems to have worked, but none of the other pollutions or preventive regulations have really worked because I won't go in Tampa Bay water swimming and I don't want to, I mean, I just feel like slowly it's getting worse, not better with all these regulations. Why?
You've got a problem down in Tampa in Florida right now. And it's exacerbated by a thing called rain. So you're flooding right now. If I'm not correct listening to the news, right?
And here, I'm a little further down than Tampa.
Okay. I just saw on the news today that Florida's flooding. There's a lot of areas because of all the rain that they're getting. And when it floods, you're getting a lot of water washed off from the land. Plus, you have a lot of cars that are being submerged in water, and those are polluting.
But we haven't
What's
rained in a
happening?
long time. We
I'm
just
sorry?
rained. We've been in dry spell for a long, long time.
Okay. But right now, what I'm seeing is that you're getting a lot of pollution from land. And it
But-
doesn't necessarily, you mean, part of the problem is you've got wind currents and water currents that are running up and down the Gulf Coast there, and you're pulling in from other areas. So yeah, I can understand what you're saying. What is it working? Is it not working? But you have when it gets to a certain point and you got it all collected, and it gets caught in that Bay Area. It just sort of sits there. It becomes a collection.
Some local areas, and obviously there's some specific concerns, but I would say it's good that we haven't had as many oil spills. That's my perception. But then again, if you're not right there in an area where there's a pollution issue, may not be as obvious. We had a couple notes earlier. One was from Bill Ackerman. Bill, are you still there? You with us, Bill? Did I lose? He's probably off powder in his nose. Bill said
I'm back. I'm back now.
Oh, go ahead. What was your comment earlier, Bill?
So actually for UX data 2, the correct code to use would be 70U, 70 uniform.
That's for training.
That's marine safety training, right? Isn't that what we're doing now?
Yes.
70K is for administration.
Good. And everybody can double check that with their FSOISs just to make sure they're on the same page. Bill also shared a guide for MS, which, Bill, if you want to send out an all message, that's completely fine. He says there's a real comprehensive guide for marine safety. So that's a good thing to share.
Yeah, I will
Jim,
share that.
Thanks, Bill. Jim Lubner, do you have any thoughts here? We did chapter 3 and a big chunk of chapter 4. Looks like we've got about 23, 24 slides left to go. Bill, any thoughts before we get jumping back in here? If you're here, Jim, or Jim?
Nothing specific from me, no. You know, there is a lot of substance here. I'm not sure, you know, most of this stuff, it's good it's written down because, excuse me, because if you get questions on a test, you can go back and refer to specific laws. You know, you can't possibly remember all this stuff.
Right on. Rebecca, other thoughts before we get back going here in another minute?
No, I mean, you know, I was going to comment at the end that 70U is the more appropriate code for Ox Data 2 for training, and then 70K would be more for staff officer participation. So
I just pulled out my book. Yes, it would be 70U. That's what you're correct on that. And 70K is for administrative. Yes.
Good. Thank you for your compliments, Virginia. We appreciate that. Other questions from the crowd? It's almost time. Any other questions real quick? Okay, we'll get back going. I show 5 after. Thank you everyone for your questions. And Jay, you got about 24 slides left, I think.
Yeah, we're going to start getting a little bit more into the acts and into the funds. This last part, it's a little bit longer. I try to make it as interesting as possible. So please, guys, bear with me. Okay, so we're back to the National Fund Center, and it gets its authority from 33 CFR 133 subchapter M, which really means that we have the responsibility to provide 6 water pollution statutes when it occurs. And what the NPFC provides is funding for quick response. It compensates claimants for cleanup costs and damages, and then it takes action to recover from the responsible party. In general, what it means is that I'll go into this a little bit more in detail on this, but this is really important to understand that there are funds available for cleanup that come from the stakeholders in the beginning. And then there's more statutes that come across on this, and we'll go into a little bit more detail. Okay, so it's supported by the fees received from the owners and operators. So when they fill out an application for, say they want to drill, and it says they put the fee in and it says you've got to put $10,000 fee up for this particular money. The money that they put in for these fees goes into the NPFC. It goes into the Pollution Financial Responsibility Funds. It goes directly into there. It doesn't go to Congress, doesn't go to anywhere else. It goes right into this particular fund so that they can control it and then allocate it when it's needed. So let's start with this. Back in 1948, the government passed the Federal Water Pollution Control Act. 1948, they started this. And then it was amended by the Clean Water Act of 1972. But why did it fail in 1948? Well, Congress authorized the Surgeon General of the Public Health Service, in cooperation with the federal and state and local authorities, to eliminate and reduce pollution of the interstate waters and tributaries. Yay, we're working on it. But Congress failed to appropriate any money for construction. So the act did little to improve the problem other than being on paper. Somebody's got their mic open. Please close.
Yeah, Pete, could you stop sharing your audio and video there? Thank you, Pete.
Thank you. So The waterways pollution theme was again amended in 56 to strengthen the enforcement provision. And again in 65 to establish standards for surface water enforceability by the state and federal authorities. And incremental adjustments through 1970 to beef up reporting requirements, enforcement provisions, and adding anti-degradation compounds, little by little by little. One of the things that I remember growing up was they eliminated phosphate in detergent. And that was supposed to, it was a start to start cleaning up the waterways. Some areas where they would dump in the pollutions without cleaning it up, the phosphate would sit there and start bubbling up and creating a foam. And phosphate added to the greenhouse effect, in this particular case, algae. It increased the algae output on waters and started choking off waters because the phosphate just help the plants grow better instead of naturally. In 72, the Clean Water Act was passed, sort of amended everything else in front of it. And to this day, 50 years later, actually it's longer than 50 years, the law is still the main way that we safeguard our nation's waterways. So we did something right. We got an act and we just amend it as we go. And it has improved our waterways. We can see that in the Great Lakes. We've seen it on some of our rivers and tributaries. I'm not going to talk about Tampa because I don't know about it. So we'll leave that one alone on there. But we have seen it up here in the Midwest a lot. The Trans-Alaskan Pipeline Authorization, or TAPA. Back in 73, the federal was signed by Richard Nixon to authorize the building of a pipeline connected the North Slopes of Alaska to the Port of Valdez down on the coast. And this became a real sticking point with a lot of the people that lived up in Alaska and environmentalists and naturalists, because they didn't want to dig. They didn't want to do anything that was going to disturb the tundra. So what they came up with is it's above ground in such a manner as to allow for migration of the animals without putting any effects. Plus the pipeline's above, so we can actually see what's going on. There hasn't been many oil spills throughout the years, and they're pretty well policed. And their service people and their maintenance people keep a good job on the pipeline and keeping it in repairs. But I just read an article that there's a serious problem now in Alaska, and it involves the pipeline. The ground and the changing climate is getting warmer. And this is built on the frozen tundra. And these stilts and brackets that they're built are built on the frozen tundra, and they're starting to melt and defrost. And the weight of these things is starting to move down a little bit. So there is a serious problem that's coming up right now, is how they're going to fix this issue unless there's a change in the climate. So that's an aside of what I found out when I was doing my research on this some more, but this is something to look out for on the environmental side. The Outer Continental Shelf Act, Amendment of 78, called ASALA. The Outer Continental Shelf Act goes back to 53, and the Constitution laws and civil laws and jurisdiction says that the subsoil and the seabeds of the outer shelf studies basically belong to the country it's attached to. And in the programs that were established to provide agencies for making decisions on what kind of resources and what impacts they were going to do if they're going to sit there and lease out this property to oil well companies. Short and sweet. But Title I says we're going to find the purpose of with respect to managing these resources. So we already have something on there that says, the title says we have to find something on there and we have to control it. Title II sort of amends the Outer Continental Shelf Act. And then Title III, we have an offshore oil spill pollution fund. Deep Water Act. What is a deep water port? A deep water port is a fixed or floating man-made structure or a group of structures other than the vessel that go beyond the shoreline and they go seaward. And their intended use of the port or terminals is for the transportation and storage of handling oil or natural gas for transportation from any state. Super tankers down in the Gulf are the areas. Super tankers do not pull into Louisiana or Texas to offload the oil on board their ships. They're out miles out, and they line up to a pier, and on the pier they will pump the oil through a pipeline that's buried in the ground through the ocean bed to land to the refineries. The ships really don't ever dock close to the shoreline. And remember I said earlier, I said deep water ports, some of their drafts are up to 50 feet with some of the super container ships. So that's what a deep water port is. But the Deep Water Port Act, as amended, establishes the licensing system for ownerships, construction, and operations, and more importantly, the decommissioning of deep water port structures that are beyond the U.S. territories. So if something happens after they no longer need it, they're still responsible. And the act protects the shoreline area. So once you build something there and you don't take care of it, or you just could try to abandon it, you are responsible. They are responsible for it. The Comprehensive Environmental Response and Compensation and Liability Act of 1980, called SURLOC. And then again, there was a thing changed. So PL, and I put it down there for everybody, PL stands for public law. So there was a public law passed in 96, and it was 510. And what SURLOC was, another amendment to it, it says, provides a federal super fund for cleaning up emergency response. We've heard of the super fund. We've used the super fund for certain other disasters. This is where it comes from. And then again, in the Superfund Amendment and Reauthorization Act of 1986. Well, what's going on here? So 42 U.S. Code, Chapter 103, Subchapter 1, Section 9601 says, hazardous substance release liability compensation, effective January 23, 2000. Oops. Establishes a broad liability that holds past and current operators of facilities from which releases occur financially responsible for the cleanup costs. Great act. The amendment help is now sitting there and it's got a little bit more teeth. Nobody's gonna turn and run away from us now. The Superfund Amendment and Reauthorization Act says it directs the EPA to establish and maintain a national priority list, better known as the NPL, of the most contaminated sites in the United States. It includes both federal and non-federal sites and is deemed present to a sufficient level that risks the warrant of the listings. In other words, if the site is so bad that it needs to be cleaned up now, they're not waiting to sit there and pass any act or try to approve funds or see what needs to be done. Oops, did I screw up? Hold on a second. I'm sorry, 33 US Code, Chapter 1 through 4, sections 27 through 01 and 2761. I read this. It put me to sleep. But the Oil Pollution Liability says this, in short: it amends the Clean Water Act. It addresses a wide range of problems associated with preventing and responding to and paying for oil pollution accidents in navigable waterways. It creates a comprehensive prevention, responsive liability, and comprehensive regime to deal with ships, vessels causing pollution in the U.S. navigable waterway. It's got more teeth. We can sit there and use the Pollution Act and clean up. The compensation says we'll get paid for this. And why did all this happen? What caused all this? What was the reason that we have the Pollution Act, the Superfund Act? What caused all this? In '89, the Exxon Valdez spilled over 11 million gallons of Alaskan crude in the waters of Prince William Sound. We knew this. What did we learn? We learned many lessons from this because of what most obvious. Obvious one, the U.S. lacked adequate resources, particularly federal funds, to respond to spills. And two, the scope of damage comparison under the federal laws to those impacted by the spills was fairly narrow. We didn't have anything that could help them out. We were basically caught flat-footed. And one of the most important things was of the Oil Clean Act, which addressed both these deficiencies. The Oil Pollution Act of 1990 takes care of what we missed. And now we have something to respond to with action. This was them cleaning up the Alaskan. They were using hot water and steam, trying to take the oil off the rocks and dissipate the oil. And then two, they brought in smaller tankers to sit there and pump out oil out of the existing Exxon Valdez into smaller tanker ships so that they could sit there and stop the pollution from it. So they would pump it into other ships. So the financial responsibility was act was created. The National Fund was created and then implemented it on Title I, Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund. And basically what happened was the administration of this was designated to the Coast Guard by executive order on the February 20th, 1991. And the National Pollution Fund Center was commissioned to implement certain provisions of the OPA Title I, administer the Oil Spill Fund Trust, ensure funding for federal response, and recover the costs from liable parties. In other words, this has teeth in it. They can go after the people who did the spills. What started all these acts? In 1970, the discovery of a severely contaminated site called Love Canal in New York. I don't know, everybody on board remember the Love Canal, where they found radioactive material and other hazardous substance in the water, and then they built homes on it. And people were dying, babies were being or born deformed. And activists went in and they started showing that the problem was there. And then they discovered what was dumped on the land was in violation of the law, but we had no teeth at the time. The other thing is called Times Beach in Missouri. That was a refinery that flooded a Missouri town and actually almost wiped it off the face of the earth. It contaminated and flooded the town. So what starts these accidents? And this catches us flat-footed. So we're learning from this. So it raised the questions whether there should be a federal role in cleaning up the environment to protect the people. So Congress acted the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation and Liability Act of 1980. Where did we get all our information from? Newspaper headlines. The philosophy, okay. What do we have here? Equity, social policy, and tort. A tort law is where the defendant owes duty of a reasonable care, meaning that who's ever transporting the oil or whatever hazardous substance on land or on water, they have a duty to be reasonably care. The materials that they're carrying in, their safety procedures, their training, the equipment they're using, all is part of the act. And it places the initial primary responsibility to compensate victims, which is of pollution and damage to the vessel operators, are those vessels and operations that have caused the damages. And vessel operators and owners of the transportation activity. So you have two, the operator himself and then the owners of the transportation or deep water activities, regardless of nationality, are required by law to demonstrate that they can meet the responsibility or they cannot return, have the right to work in the United States, or in this case, if it's international, come back and conduct business in the United States or on public waterways. There is a difference between tort law and criminal law. We're looking at tort because we're looking at the compensation of financial responsibility. The criminal law is another division, and that's somebody else's job. The objective part B, the majority of the objectives of this program is to bring reversal of the traditional practice by where the taxpayers and other damaged parties often suffer financial loss. Okay, so we have this Financial Responsibility Compensation Act. We have this fund that people want to build and do things, and they have to put the money into a fee. So what does that do? It basically says that if we're having damages, we have money to cover it, and the people that are paying for it are not the taxpayers. So under the current program, a discharge's ability to shift the cleanup cost burden on the U.S. Treasury or an insolvent operator who decides at the last minute to claim bankruptcy can or insolvent operator to enter and conduct business on the waterways of the United States with impurity is non-existent now. So to date, this program has been an unqualified success, thanks to the enforcement of the U.S. Customs and U.S. Coast Guard units. So what do? We've done something right. We've got laws in place. We have people who work in these positions, and they do their job with due diligence. And we have a success. We make sure that our laws and our accounts are well taken care of, and people are being compensated for properly. How else do we do this? Well, certificates of financial responsibility are COFRs. And under the above mentioned law, the facilities establish evidence of insurance, or they have a surety bond. And it guarantees or have self-insurance that guarantees reimbursement. So that means they have money put away in a fund that covers this, or they have insurance policies that cover this, and they're signed by other companies, so that if people do damage, they do have spills, that we don't have us coming in and paying for it itself. And a failure of a vessel to carry a valid COFR or CFOR results in an automatic detainment of the vessel until the National Pollution Vessel Containment. In other words, the vessel can be boarded and held by Coast Guard law enforcement or this, Coast Guard law enforcement. So the simplest thing is it's called an insurance policy. That's what a certificate of financial responsibility means, in essence. So the Coast Guard and U.S. Customs law enforcement goes like this. It says maintains a watch Monday through Friday from 8:30 to 1700 hours. And it processes phone calls from vessels that want to bring in, come into the United States, that are bringing it in. And it's designed to sit there and make the burden easier for everybody if they have it. So if they're coming in and they don't have a COFRs, they're informed how to get one, how to get a surety bond, how to get an insurance policy, so that they can come into the United States water. So the Customs Service and the Coast Guard work together on this, and it's a most effective and less burdensome operation on the industry, because they're working together. During an average year, they receive and immediately process 1,400 telephone call inquiries, and only 1 or 2% of the involved vessels, which are subject to these enforcements, will actually suffer a detainment beyond their intended sailing times. So the system's working. The boat owners know it, the ship operators know it, that they have to have this financial stuff available, and they're in compliance with U.S. laws. And if they can't get one, or they need to get one, the documents could be uploaded and downloaded, and it can be accessed online. So they don't have to sit there and worry about mail or getting a hard copy of it. Regulations. Programs implementing the government regulations are published in Title 33 CFR Subchapter M, Parts 133 through 138, and the Pollution Responsibility and Compensation Spills Access. So what does a CFR look like? That's a CFR book. That's what it looks like. Maybe about 8 by 5. Whoops. And there's the page of what it looks like. It's two columns, and written very small. Like I said, very detailed. And the 33 CFR is navigable waterways book that deals with and gives us our power with the Coast Guard for boating. One of them. In addition to considerations, financial responsibilities can be justified on 4 major benefits that flow from them. A vessel can escape the United States jurisdiction after causing pollution damage. Yeah, he can run, but he can't hide. Insurance or other evidence of financial responsibility currently required to keep on file is kept on file with the Assistant Commandant for Marine Safety, Security, and Stewardship in their department CG5, which is as ensures that if a vessel can be identified by witnesses, oil fingerprinting, or other means, the interest in the United States and the claimant will be protected. So in other words, you got a ship that goes out there and dumps something out there, and a satellite picks it up, or an airplane picks up the picture. They can pick it up because that particular vessel will have a lot in longitude area, and they can try to pinpoint what that vessel was at that particular time. God bless electronic monitoring. Financial responsibility and benefits continue. There's a lot in this particular subject area. Financial responsibility requires that statutory fixed amount of liability be met if the discharge of vessel sinks. In other words, the surety bank, the surety policies that they have, the insurance policy has, should be enough to cover the vessel and then some. But it doesn't mean that the people who had the problem are going to be let off the hook, because during the incident which causes spills or it's heavily damaged or whatever done to the vessel, the market value is below the pollution, claims are brought against it. So whatever's going to happen, that those people are going to be required to pay whatever they can be paid, they can pay. I'm sorry. Specifically, the so-called direction and action of a provision says an existing financial responsibility statute enables the claimant to proceed against the insurer or the guarantee who provided evidence. So if your ship damages or leaks out and it gets it all over my property, I can go after you. I can go after your insurer, or I can go after your grantor, who is responsible for that on that. Whether or not the spill you're willing to pay for it or not, I can go after your other resources. Financial responsibility requirements tend to prevent unscrupulous and or financially unsound vessels or financial operators from entering the United States or the outer continental shelf. In other words, if a ship owner or a ship operator has brought a vessel in before and leaked oil or did damage and left without paying for it, they're not going to be allowed back in the United States. It's plain and simple. They won't allow it. Because if the boat does enter back into the United States, they are going to impound the boat because they want to make up for the losses that happened earlier. So one of the things is an owner and operator with unfavorable pollution history or operations who cannot pass the pollution survey without need of repair would find it difficult to obtain insurance. And if they can't obtain insurance, then or show other financial responsibilities, then he's not going to be operating on the United States or on the outer continental shelf. So again, if it falls under that the 33 and 46 and all the other acts. So here we go again. We've got number 4, who's required by law to maintain a responsible pollution liability to operate, should not hesitate to call the Coast Guard and hire a cleanup contractor to clean up the mess. Understand something that's very important on this particular financial responsibility, number 4. The Coast Guard is not a cleanup crew. They do not go in and clean up oil spills. What the Coast Guard has done, and what part of the responsibility, is they can go in and they can contain oil spills. They'll run out booms to keep the oil from spreading. But it's the responsibility of the facility or the vessel owners and operators to be the ones that hire the contractors to clean up the mess and also pay back the Coast Guard. Now, if they have a damage, and that's not if they do, any incident that occurs in U.S. waters, you have an oil discharge, one of their engines goes out, they lose steering, they have a fire, somebody gets hurt, they're required by law to fill out a form called 2692. And basically what it is, it's called a report of marine casualty and diving casualty, or OSC related casualty. It's right across the top up there. And the insurance companies they don't look favorable on operators who fail to notify the Coast Guard, because eventually the insurance companies will get back on it. And if it's a small mess and they could have cleaned it up right away, they don't mind getting that. But you have to sit there and notify the Coast Guard and have to report a marine casualty. There's no doubt getting around it. Then you have to file that 2692, and the 2692 looks something like this. But you can also fill it out on line. It's a PDF that they can download and immediately submit to the Coast Guard units. Operators may take immediate action to reduce damage. That's their responsibility. The operator must take immediate action to reduce damage. Since 1970, there's been a combined financial responsibility fund approach for both existing statutes and various proposed bills. And then basically what it says is that if the owner or operator retains initial responsibility for the victims of pollution, you always can sit there and get help. And there you go, you basically saying, help, I can't get it all myself. I'm overwhelmed. I don't have enough money. There are various funds that come into play only for the damage or the cleanup costs, which are the responsibility of the discharge. They do not take care of the ship. And basically what it is, it exceeds the discharge's liability, and for liabilities that can't be fixed. So if he doesn't have enough insurance and he needs help and he has X amount of dollars and the spill is astronomical, this is what the funds do. So that's what they call in case of emergencies. That's your other, your fund. Moreover, what we've been working on this with is that if all these financial responsibilities were not in play, and they were excluded, as we found out earlier in our earlier years, almost 50 years ago, if we didn't have all these safeguards and funds in play, who would end up being paying for all this? It would be us. It'd be the consumer. And how would we pay for a lot of it? We would be paying for it in higher gas prices, because the tax on the gas would be a lot higher. And of course, if they didn't do it that way and we needed to get more money, we'd sit there and we appropriate money from the U.S. Treasury, good known as the taxpayers, and then we have another tax coming for us. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you.
And I did something. All right, Bob. I kind of sped it up a little bit.
That's a lot of material. You did great. Good. Questions around the room. Obviously a lot of detail and a lot of information. As you can tell, Jay worked extremely hard to put on an interesting presentation for us. And if for marine safety, it's kind of a dry. Is that a bad joke? No, maybe it's not a
No,
good joke. Do we have questions?
Yes.
We have any questions?
On the OXMEs, where can you go to find out what the tasks are that you would be doing as a MES?
You would have to go with the PQS that you can get off of,
PQS.
it's on, CG Ox, and you can find it under prevention, under the
Prevention. Thank
Directorate
you.
of Prevention.
Good question. Other questions? Your thoughts, Rebecca. Any thoughts you have for us? Right, Rebecca. She had to check out. Good. It's a long chapter, and thank you so much, Jay, for doing it. We have lost a couple people, but we did, Jay did a great job plowing through that with a lot of technical and legalese. And those are things. The thing about it is at the end of the book, they don't have a lot of questions from chapter 4. That doesn't mean the actual exam itself doesn't have questions from chapter 4. Jim Lubner, other thoughts?
No, I can, maybe I can go back to that question about MES, OXMES. OXMES is, some of the material is really sort of a basic primer on water studies and invasive species and how ecosystems, aquatic and oceanic ecosystems work. And I think the goal of OXMES is to provide background to individuals who can then perhaps go out to schools or scout groups, other kinds of civic organizations, and provide information on issues that relate to the oceanic environment. Even things like America's Waterways Watch and, the Good Mate program and some of those kinds of things fall into that OXMES set of curricula, if you will. So I think it's really a good grounding of information so that any auxiliarist, even walking along a dock and somebody says, what is this stuff in the water? Why are these critters here? Why does it look grungy? Or what do you know about Asian carp? And I can't come up with one for the ocean right now. So that you have some basic background information to give people that actually has some grounding in some some science that you've looked at. I think it's more of an educational qualification and something that isn't necessarily specifically asked by the Coast Guard. It's something any of us can do just by making some contacts locally, and those become marine safety activities then if we're out there educating and informing people about these kinds of things. I don't know if that's helpful.
It's very
Thank
helpful.
you.
And Jim is going to come into play here on chapter 7. Those of you that have been watching the book here, you notice a whole lot of the test questions come from chapter 7. And the hope with this class is to introduce people a little more into the depth of marine safety. And also when you're among the public doing maybe public affairs or public education, you'll have more depth to your knowledge. So make you more empowered as auxiliarists to really provide a sense for the public when you speak with them with the purpose of the Coast Guard and how important this particular aspect is. Other thoughts, Jay?
Yeah, I was gonna go back and do what Jim said, which was kind of important. It basically is more with the environmental thing and trying to help boaters understand, when you were explaining it, how we spread the aquatic nuisance species from one place to another. And that would be it would be more with the educational side on that right now.
For instance, Jay, when you were talking about phosphates and phosphate detergents, some of the background information in the OXMES program would give you a little more depth, a little more detail about how phosphorus is an essential nutrient for plants, and it's usually, at least in freshwaters, it's usually a limiting nutrient. So adding more phosphorus increases plant growth, and if you increase it too much, that can be very bad for the system. So that's
Correct.
something of the kind of stuff you learn in the OXMES program.
Right.
I have two questions. One is, will there be a certificate for this particular course? And B2, I noticed some people were saying to put our time in as 70U, and then earlier in the course we talked about 70K.
So
You're gonna
information.
put it, you're
Go
gonna
ahead.
put it in 70U because it is training. Forget 70K, it's not administrative. And then as for a certificate, I think that your test is online and you're gonna do it online, and if you successfully complete the test, it'll work two ways. One, you should be able to print out a certificate at the end of the course that you successfully completed it. And then I think it goes into Ox data automatically and pops up on your Ox2 as an online test.
I do apologize. I didn't mean for the test. I meant for this particular course that we're taking with you guys.
Yeah, this course here, the Introduction to Marine Safety.
Well, I meant like being that we're taking it through y'all, I wondered if y'all guys' district would come up with like certificates for everyone who attended all the class sessions.
That's Bob's answer.
Well, there's not a specific certificate for this course, but after Chapter 8, we've got Jim Lubner here. He's going to get into the nuts and bolts of both marine safety. Jim, why don't you explain the Trident and well, no, we're not going to talk about it now. We're going to talk a lot about it after Chapter 8. So not next Friday, but the Friday after. So we'll have more information about that then, if that's okay, Bill. Sorry, we're going to scoot around that one. But if you're going to be here on the 28th, aren't you, Bill, William?
Yeah, I plan on it.
Okay, so you're going to get the full lowdown then. A little
But
tease.
my question had nothing to do with the Trident or with the marine safety device or any of the programs. I just wanted to know if I attend all the sessions for this course, if I got a course certificate of completion or whatever the case may be.
I'm not sure that a course certificate after attending all these sessions would add a whole lot. I think the real value added to attending these sessions is then being able to go back and hopefully without not too much problem, complete that test for the IMSEP and then actually get the IMSEP, the fact that you've completed the IMSEP course as part of your official record. A certificate from this, and $3 will maybe buy you a cup of coffee.
Well, it's something nice to put up on the
450.
wall.
Right on. No, I wish I had better news, William. This is a stepping stone, like so many of the training programs in the Coast Guard Auxiliary. It's getting you ready to do the next thing and grow in the
Well, a lot of
organization.
the other training courses, when you complete, like at least here in 8th Western, like if you do our Marine Safety Academy or whatever the case may be, you get a little certificate at the end of the course if you attend all the sessions. I was just curious.
No, you're right. And boy, motivators, there's what is the old talk? we had a member who was a disabled United States Army member, and he said, you know, people are motivated by recognition. You get a ribbon, and you can get people to climb mountains just for a little piece of cloth and colored cloth, just to show what they've done. But it's a fair question. And Virginia, thank you for your kind words. So we're gonna kind of wrap it up now. And the thing I wanted to share next week, if you survive, this is a tough class, and it's a lot of reading involved and a lot of learning, a lot of new learning happens. So after chapters 5 and 6, which Rebecca, who's no longer with us, we're going to talk briefly about strategies to take this rather thick amount of information in the Marine Safety Manual and to prepare to take the final exam, which is, you know, just sort of a chance for you to display your knowledge gained here. So that'll be coming up after next week. There's 13 chapters, but I would argue after our third session of 6 that we're more or less halfway through the game. And our goal is, of course, to get all the way through chapter 13 with this course and then cut you loose so you can take a shot at that IMSEP test, which Chris, who is a very smart guy, shared that it's not a piece of cake. You'll have to use your abilities to find the way to get through that test. But a lot of it is sitting through this class and watching the slides and remembering as much as you can. Who else is here? Jim, any other last thoughts before we kind of wind it down?
Not for me.
Jay, any other last thoughts here?
I want to thank everybody who stayed on and to the finish, and put up with my raspy voice over here. I want to thank you.
Job.
Yeah, let's take a second here. If you all remember last week, let's go down to our reactions. The very bottom, if you get your mouse and scroll to the bottom, and you have a chance to give Jay the thumbs up there on your reactions and say, hey, thanks for taking the time to create all these slides. The wild thing about this class, thanks, James. The wild thing about this class is we wanted to present it to you, and there was no background. We had nothing to really provide you except for what our hardworking instructors worked very intensely, effort intense to create good slides. Thank you, Felix. And Jay, if you would hit the stop sharing button. And then do you know how to make me host again on the little buttons over on the right? I don't know if you know how to make me host again.
Hold on a second. I stopped sharing.
Okay, cool. Thank you, James.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead. And
Are there
Who is that?
the back of Ron Norrie, the back of the book, page 93, 94, the question and answers? We did cover one, number 13. Are there any others in here that we discussed this evening that should be taken care of in these question and answers towards the back of the book?
So on the practice test in the back of the book, no. However, when you get to the final exam, the information in that chapter 4, as well as items you'll find in the Marine Safety Manual, are going to help you make it through that test. And it's a lot of reading. I get it.
But none of these in the back of the book really correspond with what we did today, except for the one question.
Correct.
Okay,
But
just making sure I didn't miss something.
Right. Well, that's the practice ones. When it comes to the real test, there'll be questions about it. And good question, though. All right. Did you know how to make me host again?
Okay, hold on a second. I stopped sharing.
Good. So on the bottom, it says participants. So click on participants, and my name should be up there. And then there's 3 dots next to my name.
Yeah.
So click on the 3 dots, and it says make host.
Hold on a second.
Technology. I like this better than go to meeting or I'm a host. All right, fantastic. Well, we're going to wrap it up, folks. A lot of information. Good on you for toughing it out and staying here for the entire 2 hours.
My hats to the West Coast people for it's what now going on to 10 o'clock, guys. Thank you very much for the East Coast people. I'm sorry, for 10 o'clock. So, guys, stay safe out on the East Coast there.
Good. All right. One last final thumbs up for you, Jay. And thank you for being here, everyone. We look forward to seeing you next Friday night. Somebody said, is it 7 o'clock New York time the class starts? No, 7 o'clock Chicago time. Sorry, we're in the middle of the country.
8 o'clock Eastern time.
8 o'clock Eastern. Thanks for being here, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Be sure to study your books in advance so you're ready to go. Have a
Thank
good
you.
night.
Thank you. Good night.
Being here.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jay.
Appreciate all
Thanks,
you do.
everyone.
Thanks, Jay.
From Fort Lauderdale, we're not flooded. It's only in the news.
Sounds good. All right, team. I'm going to shut her down. Have a good night.
Good night.
Night, sir.
Great job, Shane.